Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, you lovely people. I will let you be warned right now, my internet is choppy, and the internet of my guest is choppy, and so who knows what might happen on tonight's live stream. I might disappear, and my guest might be left on his own. He might disappear, and I might be left on my own, or we both might disappear, and you might be left on your own. It's just that wild. I hope that you're going to enjoy this. We're going to be talking obviously about a serious topic, the challenge of political Islam and the church's response. And I'm going to be doing it with a guest who I'm bringing on in just a second. However, if you all please could like this video, if you could subscribe if you haven't, and that includes you who are listening to it as a recording later on. And if you could share it as well, share it on your social media, so that people can know that we're having this conversation. And obviously, the work that I do because of the kind support of Covenant partners who help me to do this and to sustain myself. I've got to pay for bills like everybody else, and people's financial support supports me to do this full time. So after praying about it, and if you feel able without placing yourself under any burden at all, assuming that you get a yes from God, then please do consider and support the work that I do. So without further ado, let me bring in my guest who will be known to many of you. Dr. Daniel Brubaker, how are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you, Bob?
I'm really good. And at last, I've got you on my show. This has been something that I've wanted a long time since you launched your channel. Textual Variants of the Quran, I believe it's called. Is that right?
It's called Variant Quran, yes.
Variant Quran, an excellent resource, very academic. For anyone that hasn't subscribed, I want to encourage you to go and subscribe. Do you want to introduce? I obviously know you. I've met you. We've spoken in person. We've worked together at the NAPC conference, and it was great having you there. Looking forward to uploading your talks, which I'm listening to at the moment. But do you just want to introduce yourself to people who may not be familiar with you?
Sure. I won't say too much, but I am a postdoctoral, I would say, researcher. I do a lot of different things, but most of my days are spent now writing and researching, and occasionally I see the feed having gone out there, so I'm going to wait.
Yeah, you cut out again. Yeah, we missed your entire introduction, so let's try that one more time from the top.
Right. Maybe it's providential, right? Nobody should know who I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I am a postdoctoral academic. I finished my PhD at Rice University in the area of religious studies, focused on Quran manuscripts. I wrote it on corrections, intentional changes in Quran manuscripts, so post-production corrections in the manuscripts. And I've continued in that work. I published my first book in 2019. A second book is just right on the cusp of coming out on the same topic. And I write books and articles, and I speak occasionally. And we live about an hour out from Washington, D.C., so I'm also involved. And this is probably what we'll touch on, what we talk about today, but I am involved in, I would say, political philosophy. I'm involved politically here in Virginia, and occasionally, go in and have interaction with people in the state of Virginia and sometimes in DC on some of these things. So that's that's it. I care a lot about the intersection of ideas and our real life, and that includes the way our societies are structured. So yeah,
that's a brilliant intro, and we've already agreed that we are going to talk about your study of the Quran and the textual variants. And then at some point, I believe I'm going to come on your channel and chat maybe about politics or talk about Islam on one of your channels in the future. So,
okay. So, Bob, I think that we could be, if we could, and I mentioned it in an email to you yesterday, but we can discuss. But if we could focus a little bit on the political philosophy and those things, societal things today, because the only reason.
That's the plan today.
Okay,
that
perfect,
is the plan
perfect.
today.
Okay,
that is the plan. I'm talking about in the future.
Yeah, exactly.
At a different live stream, on a different day. So we'll start as we always do with a prayer. Have you chosen the psalm that you're going to use for?
Sure. Would you like me just to read
that as our opening prayer?
Absolutely. It's Psalm 16, so I'll give people a moment to open their Bibles if you want. I'm reading from the New American Standard Bible. It says, "Preserve me, O God, for I take refuge in you. I said to the Lord, you are my Lord. I have no good besides you. As for the saints who are in the earth, they are the majestic ones in whom is all my delight. The sorrows of those who have bartered for another God will be multiplied. I shall not pour out their drink offerings of blood, nor will I take their names upon my lips. The Lord is the portion of my inheritance and my cup. You support my lot. The lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. Indeed, my heritage is beautiful to me. I will bless the Lord who has counseled me. Indeed, my mind instructs me in the night. I have set the Lord continually before me. Because he is at my right hand, I will not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad and my glory rejoices. My flesh also will dwell securely. For you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, nor will you allow your Holy One to undergo decay. You will make known to me the paths of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. In your right hand there are pleasures forever."
This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to
Amen.
God. So let's get cracking. We're talking about political Islam. For me, it's obvious, and I'm sure it is to you and to pretty much most of my audience, because that's why they're here, that political Islam represents an existential threat to the West. But to get us going, I was wondering if you could maybe explain, to your own observations, how you see that threat expressing itself in the USA.
Yeah, it's a good opening framing question. And I assume that we'll unpack it for this next couple of hours. But so I think the place to begin is
Well, it looks like we might be having some technical problems on Dr. Brubaker's side. So hopefully the internet will work. If not, it might be that we have to rearrange this and try it on another day. These things do happen occasionally. Can I just check, guys, can you hear me? If you could put a 1 just to confirm that you can hear me, that would be great. Yeah, it might become a Q&A. I just need to know if you can hear me, guys. Right, so the issue is definitely not on my side. Okay, so we don't know if Dr. Brubaker is going to come back, or we don't know whether he's going to come back. So we'll try and wrestle with the IT for a bit and see what happens.
Some other tabs.
Dr. Brubaker, can you hear me? Yeah, he won't be getting anything from my side either, so he's probably not even hearing me. It's a great pity. We will make this work, guys, either today or another day, I promise you. And you really do want to hear Dr. Brubaker's thoughts. He's a very intelligent guy on the matter. Oh, can you hear me, Dr. Brubaker? Hello, hello.
Yep. There we are. Have you got me back?
Yeah, I've got you back. I don't know. I think the internet, it's unusual because it's usually the internet problems are all on my side, but I think on this occasion it definitely is yours.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
Is your device plugged in? Is it running out of battery? That sometimes impacts it.
It is plugged in. Is it better if it's not?
No, it's better if it is.
It is plugged in. Let me just make sure. Right. Okay, I am on the Wi-Fi. Yeah, it should be okay. So
yeah. So basically, you started talking and then you disappeared. So once again, we didn't hear anything. So if you want to take it right from the top, I'll frame the question again. Sure, and then if it happens again, what I'm going to suggest is that we turn off our screens and we just do audio only, and that might help with the bandwidth.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. So I asked you about how you're seeing the existential threat of Islam express itself in the USA. And in comic fashion, he's gone again. Are you there, Dr. Brubaker?
Here I am. Yes.
Right. What I'm going to suggest is turn off your camera, and that might help with the bandwidth.
Okay, let's try this.
And we'll do voices only, guys. So you might as well listen to this as a radio channel.
Sorry, everyone. You're not going to see my beautiful face for the next.
Yeah, they've all had a good look at him. There we go. You know he's real. Let me just turn off my camera as well and see if that helps.
Right. How's that? Any better?
Well, it has helped a little bit, yeah. Okay, let's try this as audio only. Right, try again. Existential threat in America. Over to you.
There we go. Okay, so I didn't catch your setup there, but I think I can answer the same question again. So I think that when we're talking about our societies, the way I look at it is I understand these things, sources, that is the early religious sources of Islam, the Quran, the Hadith. I know how Islam came to be and how it came to be in political power, and what lies beneath that in the life of Muhammad. And so I know that our societies have become a little bit more sophisticated in the past 20 years or so on these things, just generally. But I suppose we'll unpack this later, but we do see an advance of a belief system and an advance of I would say shift of political authority and political power. You can recognize the struggle there, and it's not just a matter of different people want to practice different religions. It's something bigger than that, and I think most people sense that. So what we have seen, of course, the big event in the past couple of decades was 9/11, 2001. 2002, right? 2001. Yeah, because our daughter was born just after that, and I was in Chicago at the time. So that was the big sort of defining event that everybody said, "Oh wow," And but the interesting thing when we talk, just to sort of frame the developments that have happened since then, is until that time, as I recall, I don't think we had any Muslim elected members of Congress, or maybe one or something like that. But we had, and we in the decade and a half or so following 9/11, the number of mosques in the United States doubled, more than doubled, and now we have many elected representatives, national elected representatives in the U.S. Congress who are Muslim, and so forth. And so, and then we see changes in society that are highlighting the friction between the Islamic impression of how life should be lived, and the sort of American liberty and justice for all and freedom of speech and all these points of friction, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But just in general answer, that's what I give as a big picture of how I see things developing on this side of the water.
Yeah, and for those that are looking for a really in-depth study of Islamization in the UK, I couldn't do better than to encourage you to get the book written by Tim Dieppe, which is entitled The Challenge of Islam, Understanding and Responding to Islam's Increasing Influence in the UK. And he catalogues systematically, comprehensively, and in excruciatingly painful detail the process and development and advancement of Islamization in the UK. And for the sake of this conversation, Dr. Brubaker, I'm going to split up the rest of the conversation into the church's cultural response, the church's political response, the church's economic response, the church's social response, and then the church's spiritual response. So obviously, because politics is downstream, is downstream of culture, we need to be thinking about the story that organizes our society. And in terms of our response, I think that there is a temptation, and I wonder what you feel about this. There's a temptation amongst Christians, that a default position, to assume and adopt a sort of classical liberalism as the default position in terms of organizing our response to Islamization. And I don't hold out much hope that that will succeed, partly because I think that it's classical liberalism that got us into this mess in the first place, and it's bastard child progressive liberalism. And I think that we need to see arising a political, a sort of organizing principle of Christians striving to a new kind of society, a new kind of civilization that is post-Enlightenment new Christendom, as a way of organizing the sort of collecting the cultural thoughts and mobilizing all the resources towards a common end. Because I think that it's by building something better than Islam that we defeat Islamization. And what's your take on that? And do you agree, disagree, or what are your qualifications towards it?
Well, yeah, so there are a couple of different things to be said on that. I think a lot of and you said that politics are downstream from culture, and I would say another thing that I heard recently, which is completely true, is culture is downstream from theology.
Yeah.
So, but many people, I think, probably in both our countries, but certainly in the United States, which is where my area of emphasis. We did live in the UK for a year or two, so I'm very comfortable over on that side of the water too. But we don't really know who we are, and we don't really understand the heritage that we've been handed, the inheritance that we've been handed, and where it came from, and what is the foundation of it. And so what I see happening today is people are kind of throwing things overboard that they think are not essential, which really, but really are. And among those are the biblical foundations of our society. Now, we have our heritage from, we share a heritage, of course, thankfully, from with the UK. We were born out of Britain in many ways, and also we have some heritage with the Netherlands and other other places. But I wouldn't say, a lot of people like to point to the Enlightenment and say, well, it's all about the Enlightenment, but it really isn't. We have a biblical foundation, even in our the way that we've structured our society. American society, the U.S. Constitution is written with a very deep and profound and biblically informed understanding of the most basic concept that people are sinful. That there's a universal, people are not basically good. We like to think that because we all know that everybody kind of wants to do what's right. But in the end, despite us wanting to do what's right, everybody is sinful. Even the best of people we are inclined towards sin. And so the structure of our society is based upon that theological but I would say empirically very well grounded. If you've ever lived in the world for 5 minutes, you can recognize this fact. And so our structure of government is written with reality, empirical reality, in mind, the checks and balances, the separation of powers, so that you don't have an opportunity, if the plan is followed, you don't have an opportunity for
Hello, Dr. Brubaker. So, Dr. Brubaker, we lost you for a minute there.
It was said by one of our founders, I think.
Dr. Brubaker. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So we lost you for a moment there. The last thing that I heard was, if the plan is followed, and then you cut out. So if you could pick up your thought from that point.
Yes. So if the plan is followed, that is, if the Constitution is followed, then there is ample opportunity. Our system of government on this over here is designed to allow the people to be governing. As a technical matter, the people in the United States are the sovereign. We don't have a sovereign over us. We are the sovereign, and we govern ourselves. And that is not to say that we don't believe that God is sovereign over everything, but it is to say that in terms of our means of governing, we leave it in the hands of the people. And so most of the problems that I see over here recently have been due to a chipping away at that system which protects the sovereignty of the people. When you have, for example, when you have a Supreme Court that is engaged in legislation, well, the Constitution says the legislative authority is vested in the Congress. And the Supreme Court has no authority to do that, or presidents can make executive orders, or people giving away their powers. You know, we've seen vast amounts of the power that belongs to the people handed by Congress away to other public-private partnerships and different entities, and they really have no right to give away the people's sovereignty. So we're getting a little bit into the weeds, but my main point is that we do have a tool in front of us, informed by people who, people like to say, well, American founders were all deists. Well, that's not. That's a great oversimplification. There were many strong Christians who were engaging their theological understanding when they tried to draft the Constitution. But my point is that we have tools here now. The question, when we're coming around to,
if I can jump in, I mean, one of my issues with the kind of default position is that when we talk about the we in this conversation, obviously you're framing the we as an American in America, thinking about America.
Yes.
And I think that, as you've said, and I totally agree, as politics is downstream of culture, culture is downstream of theology. And I completely agree with that. But if we're thinking theologically as Christians, then the we has to be the global church. And it has to be something that is supranational. This needs to be a response that certainly all English-speaking Christians can get involved in, because English-speaking Christians share, as you've already pointed out, certain institutional, legal kind of frameworks and heritage. And I think that's part of the problem. We need a shift in our thinking that moves more towards being Christian than, say, being British or American or Australian or Canadian. And we need to frame the struggle within its longer 1400-year framework, rather than within the short span of Islamization in our individual countries. And then finally, before I let you respond, I would also say that we've got to ask, what are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to just maintain the societies as we found them at our birth and development, or are we striving to a different kind of civilization that more closely reflects the kingdom of God. And I would be towards that kind of persuasion. So just my sort of comeback on what you've said so far.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, in a couple of different ways. When we use the term, when I use the term "we," even with respect to American government, obviously it's the case that nobody living today is even had any part in the drafting of the American Constitution or most of the amendments or so forth. It's been an ongoing process. So we did inherit in part, and we didn't do this. When I say we abolished slavery, for example, I didn't have a part in that. In fact, my family had not yet, my mom's family hadn't even come over from Norway at the time. And so we kind of use this as shorthand. So there's that. But then the other we that you mentioned is the church. Now, as Christians, we are part of the body of Christ. We're being built together, and we are part of the body of Christ. And we are, that is our ultimate identity. That is who, I completely agree with you on that. But you've touched on something that is one of the I would say really important differences between Islam and biblical Christian faith, and that is that the government, Christians are called in Romans 13 to be subject to the governing authorities, to be good citizens wherever we find ourselves, and we are not called in any place to impose, shall we say, Christian government over the world. It is, however, I want to add a caveat to that, and that is really important, is that often, and I see it happening over here, I know it's happening in the UK as well, is Christians are treated as, in our pluralist sort of value diversity societies, they act as though religion is has no place at the table, and they fail to recognize that their progressive ideology is itself a religion. So basically, there is an established church in the United States right now. It is the Church of Progressivism, and Christians are told, well, no, you have to behave over there, and you cannot bring your understanding of the Bible or your Christian principles or your sense of what's right and wrong into government, because that would be church and state, combining church and state. And that's a completely false way of looking at things. Every citizen has the not only the right, but also indeed the obligation to apply their understanding of what is right and what's wrong in their in how they vote, and if they're elected to office, in how they legislate and how they govern before God, with a sense before God. And how that changes and why it's, I think, so critical with what we're looking at here is at the moment and for all of our history, Christians in some way or another, there are mature Christians, there are real Christians, there are people who call themselves Christians who are not, who are cultural Christians, but Christians by and large have represented the great majority of our society. And so the governing authorities, that is the sovereign in the United States, that is the people, have been Christians, and they've been governing to some degree based upon what they were brought up understanding is right and wrong, and that was informed by the Bible. So if we have a major shift in the population, in the makeup of the population, to people who don't share that idea that the Bible is God's word, even though they may not follow it, even though they may live totally sinful lifestyle, many people who are living in sin still recognize, yeah, I shouldn't steal. Yeah, I shouldn't murder. You write the 10 Commandments or whatever are so ingrained in us. We have that shared heritage and respect for the Bible. So the point, maybe we can just go on from there and I can let you set up the next question, is that what happens, however, when that makeup of that society shifts very dramatically to people who don't have that same sense of the Bible is true?
Yeah, I want to stress this is a forwards and backwards conversation, not so much an interview, but just two people chewing the cud on the issue. But I want to pick up on what you've said, because I genuinely believe that this is an important point to the church's response. and it is a failure of its theology. And I think it's really important to hammer this down, because it is genuinely, I think, a dangerous mistake that the church is doing, which is to assume the normativity of the liberal secular framework.
Yeah,
because as you've just said, even though historically America has always been infused with mature Christians running the government and applying Christian principles to government, for instance, it's why the federal government outlawed polygamy when the Mormons tried to do polygamy, for instance. And that was an example of the Christian government imposing itself upon the Mormon faith, even when I believe at the time they shuttled off to, is it Nevada?
It's Utah.
Utah, and they'd not been fully federalized at that point, I don't believe. I might be getting a bit of my history wrong.
Yeah, you're right. I think the state became a state after that.
Exactly. So the Christians at that time did impose themselves upon a semi-autonomous kind of region, a gray area state, as it were. But the point I'm trying to draw out is it's this idea of the liberal contract between the citizen and the state that is facilitating and permitting Islamization. And while we are committed ideologically to that framework of the citizen-state contract, there is no good liberal way you can stop Islamization, except, and this will lead into a conversation on migration. And so this is why I think that we need to correct our theology and not wed ourselves to the liberal narrative, but to renew a vision of Christendom, because that gives Christians a new organizing principle for a civilizational task that allows it then to engage with Islam in every sphere, as well as the liberalism that allows it to perforate and to penetrate Western civilization as is. So I just wanted to pick you up on that, because I think that's really crux to the problem, because you said, it's the idea of the liberal contract. Citizens have the right to bring in their laws, and the progressives, as you've quite rightly said, are hypocritical on this, because whilst they're imposing their values and their metaphysics on the rest of us, they're telling us that we can't do the same. But then they're also allowing Muslims to do it, and there is definitely a double standard to be called out there. I'll let you respond to that, and then we'll maybe move on to the question of migration, because that's obviously central to this conversation.
Yeah, no, it's. I agree with you. It is true that this idea that the progressive view of the world is that. Well, it's hypocritical, because they say that everything is equally valid, equally good. Everything is good, but really what they're saying is everything's good except anything the Bible says that contradicts whatever we want to do is good. It's really a kind of a sneaky move, and hopefully more and more people are recognizing it. I heard recently, it's not exactly on our topic, but it does kind of touch on it tangentially. It was an interaction, or it was a comment that John Lennox made about an interaction that he had with an atheist, might have been Richard Dawkins. It's interesting. I was reading Dawkins back when I was studying biology in my undergrad many years ago, before he was that prominent as an atheist apologist. But whether it was him or not is not kind of beside the point. But he was pressed on the idea of whether people raised in a Christian, most people who remain in the religion in which they were into which they were born. And so if you're born into a Christian society and so forth, you're going to wind up 97% of the time and so forth. And same thing for Hindu and so forth. And so it was put to John Lennox, what do you think about this? And he said, well, he gave the example of his interlocutor, the person interviewing him. He said, well, you were raised in a Christian. Oh, no, he actually asked me, he said, well, were you raised in an atheist home and you still are in the religion of your birth. And the guy said, well, atheism is not a religion, right? To which Lennox brilliantly said, well, I was under the impression that you believed it.
Yeah.
And so,
Right.
you know, what people fail to recognize is that these are all religious, and you've touched on it, so we don't need to belabor the point. But it really does matter that we have, because if we had, you know, with the number of Christians that we have in our societies, if we were stepping up, and I think this comes around to validating your point about re-understanding the meaning of Christendom, and by Christendom we can talk about what that means, but basically Jesus told his followers to be salt and light. We're supposed to be you know, a good influence, bringing good flavor into the world, not bad things, but a good aroma into the world. And we abdicate that duty many, many times. And if we're doing that better, then the whole world is going to be a better place, because we're going to be little examples of Jesus, little reflections of Jesus in the world. And there are very few people who truly, if they look at the life of Jesus, would consider that to be a bad thing.
Yeah, I think part of the problem that we're finding, certainly in the paradigm of a classical liberal society, is that Muslims are doing a far better job of filling up the legal space that they're allowed to. They're doing a far better job of filling up the cultural space that they're allowed to. And Christians are not. We're not using up the fullness of the social, economic, cultural, and political space that we could if we applied our faith more fully, more brazenly, more confidently, in a much more muscular fashion. And it is that lack on our part that means that we're not having the same impact that we could have, you know. So again, do you want to come back on that, or you know?
Yeah, I mean, I just a quick comment, and that is, I agree. Christians tend to be, in some ways, kind of timid, kind of, I won't say afraid of our shadow, but we're very, because we want to, and the people who are our enemies, and by enemies I don't mean that we hate people, but the people who are opposed to us, have recognized that Christians, as a strategic matter, they've recognized that Christians don't want to do bad things. They don't want to be seen as doing wrong or harming people. So with the slightest accusation sometimes that, oh, you're not being sensitive, or you're not considering, or you're not loving your neighbor, or whatever, we tend to back off very quickly from such an accusation before even fully considering whether we are in fact acting in an unloving way. And so the mere accusation itself sometimes serves as a weapon in the hands of those who are our enemies, and again, not people that we hate, but people who oppose us, to get us to step out of the legislative space, for example, or the governing space, and to yield the territory to them. And we have to get better at saying no. And I think that begins with people reading their Bible every day and going, no, this actually really is what I'm advocating for, really is good. And it's not only good for me as a Christian, but it's good for everybody. It's good for all of society. And here's why. And so people need to be thinking about that. Your word have I hidden in my heart. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. And we need to have the word of God in us so that we understand what is good and what's not good. And we can articulate that to others and stand firmly, but kindly. And the other thing that you mentioned is to be almost brazen application and bold application. Yes, I would say that that's one difference between, another difference that I notice as a generalization between Islam and Christianity. And that is that Christians, if they're real Christians, tend to be following what's true, but we also tend to be humble. And so, and self-reflective, and that self-reflectiveness is a quality. It's not a flaw. And I see it far more, but you don't often see that in Muslims. Sometimes you do, but often you see just this, what I would definitely define as or characterize as a brazen, no, we're going to do this, not because we've really thought it through and believe it to be true, but because it's what we think the Quran says and we're going to apply it. So I think that's a really important distinction.
Yeah, I think again, a lot of this I put down to how the church has been discipled by the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment convinced the church that its religion was only a private matter, and something that
Yeah,
wasn't serious enough to formulate
and that was
our
a mistake.
laws.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, and the church bought into that. The church
Hmm.
went into that, and I think that the church hasn't even begun really to throw off that mindset, which is again why I talk about this idea of
I think it's
Christendom.
shifting now. I think it is shifting.
Yeah, yeah, yes, definitely. I want and so we've got clearly a progressive Muslim alliance. I mean, some people say it's the Red Green Alliance. I'm not so sure that progressives are necessarily socialists or communists, but I get why people say that.
Yeah.
I've got my own theory as to why there's a progressive Muslim alliance. I think it's because progressives who tend to live in communities surrounded by other white progressives have fetishized anyone who's not white, and they
Yes.
conflate race and religion as being the same thing.
Yeah.
And even though obviously there are white Muslims, they assume that Islam is a religion of an ethnic minority. And so for them, it is empowering the oppressed to empower Islam. And because Christianity is considered to be the white man's religion and the oppressive religion, or the white man is oppressive, therefore Christianity is oppressive, they seek to restrain Christianity to create that space for others. And from the Muslim perspective, it's that they've just got this field of useful idiots who will help them Islamify society. So they're going to play them for the fools that they are. And that's my take on the sort of progressive Muslim alliance. Do you have the same take, a different take? Do you have a nuance to add to that? Hello, Dr. Brubaker. Are you still there? So we can assume that there's some kind of internet problem. You guys still with me? If I can get a sound test from the rest, just give us a 1 to say that you can hear me, guys, while Dr. Brubaker comes back. So if you could just put a 1 in the chat, guys, so that I know that you have heard what I'm saying. Oh, he's gone. Right, I'm going to give him time to come back, but in the meantime, as I'm sure he will be making his way back once his internet gets working. Here he is. No, he's trying, I can tell. So I'll take questions while Dr. Brubaker gets his internet sorted. So if you've got to ask a question, here he is, actually.
There we go. Okay, I lost you.
There we go. You're back. Yeah. So what was the last thing you heard?
The view that that anybody who's not white is
nope, you've gone again.
That therefore Islam is associated with that is a that by support.
No, Dr. Brubaker.
Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes.
Can you?
I heard
yes?
that I heard the assertion that that the progressive view is this conflation of Islam with being non-white, and that the support of Islam therefore is the support of oppressed groups.
Yes. So, and obviously the religions are associated with the races. So Christianity is oppressive because it's associated with white people. What do you think that is the root of the? And obviously the Muslims just see a bunch of useful idiots, or the Islamists see a bunch of useful idiots to play, and so they're playing them. Do you believe that that's the reason for this red-green alliance, or do you think it's rooted in something else, or what would you say to that?
Yeah, well, the communists and the Marxists see it see them as useful idiots as well. And I have one of my close friends here in Virginia. Her name is She Van Fleet. She's a survivor of Mao's Cultural Revolution, and she wrote a book that's become very prominent on the issue. And her view So depending on who you talk to, Islam or communism are the bigger threat, but both of them are playing a strategic game. And it does go to this narrative of victim. You are a victim because of your whatever category group, your race, your religion, your identity, whatever. It's all about dividing. It's divide and conquer. That's basically what it is. And it's not really about upholding the oppressed. It's about overthrowing the existing, in our case, government by the people, and replacing it with government by either I would say Islam or the or more Marxist, the government owning the means of production and so forth kind of thing. People don't have their rights to their property and things like that. So yeah, that's all going on. And there is what's called the Red Green Alliance. The person who wrote the book here in Virginia also happens to be somebody that I know, and I've lives not too far from us. So I've spoken with her about that. So it's all kind of mixed up. I don't think it's a natural alliance. Obviously, you have people on the communist progressive side who you have all the LGBTQ stuff, and you say, what does that have to do with Islam? How is that even aligned? But as a matter of working side by side to displace the Christians, I suppose they would, if I could paraphrase it, they would see it as sort of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Right?
Yeah. So what kind of narratives then do you think? So let's I mean, we've spent the first 45 minutes talking essentially of more or less on theology. What do you think are some of the sort of cultural messages that we need to be, sort of cultural narratives that we need to be building on and getting out there into society? Whether it done through art, song, poetry, books, works of fiction, movies, or tracts or videos like this. What are some of the if they're creating this narrative of victimhood, if they're creating this narrative, and the Muslims are pushing this narrative that Islam is superior, Islam will be triumphant. What do you think are the kind of narratives that the church needs to be putting out there in response?
Well, there are a number of different things to be said on that. I would say that, again, we can lead by example in our lives. Number one, be, living lives that are upright and good, seeking the good of others, modeling what it means to care about everyone. If the accusations most of the time are false about being, Christians or people on what we would say the right in this country are, as being racist or unkind or uncaring or what's the word? Not empathetic or whatever. These are allegations that are thrown out there as weapons, but we genuinely do need to be loving everybody and emphasizing that the good, but also I would say understanding, and I'm going to turn on my camera for a second because
Nope, you've gone.
The thing.
Hello? 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 Are you still there? Dr. Brubaker, unfortunately, the moment you turned on your camera, the moment you turned on your camera, you just vanished. The moment you turned it off.
There we go. Okay. Is this better?
Yeah, it is. I can hear you again.
Okay. So we ran what I have titled an American Foundations book group. And so we read a title. Most of them were, like the Federalist Papers, foundational. We read
no, Dr.
things
Brubaker.
That were acquainted with what it was that. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, you were a bit choppy there. Hello? So you set up a book group. You read some titles, and then you chopped out a bit.
Yeah. So basically, to have the discussion to allow people to get reacquainted with the connection between the ideas that we have that sort of sparked the origin of our nation, which happened in 1776. It didn't happen, we crafted a nation. By we, again, I mean those who came before us, but they crafted a nation that was in conscious opposition to things like slavery and so forth, with their affirmation that all men are created equal and so forth, things like that. But where did that come from? So we need to connect the dots, have people in this generation able to connect the dots between the Bible and the way society gets structured. And my friend, Dr. A.S. Ibrahim just recently wrote a book, and it was published, called Sharia versus the U.S. Constitution. And the reason I wanted to mention that, and I'll send you a link that you can put up on your in the comment section or the description of your video.
Yeah, will do.
What he does is he goes through chapter by chapter, and with respect to Islam specifically, he points out why the different aspects, what aspects of Sharia, and he's talking about Sharia, what aspects that are universally acknowledged or nearly universally acknowledged in Sharia are in conflict with the U.S. Constitution, and why. And he really helps readers to go through and understand what's the big deal, kind of thing. Why is the death for people who leave Islam, why is that an issue? Why are the insult of Islam, why is freedom of speech, why is that an issue, and so forth, so that people can really see what kind of change is being asked of them when we welcome the consideration of the views of other people, and again, before we throw out the baby with the bathwater, don't throw it out until you understand why it's so good in the first place.
Yeah, I think for myself, there is definitely a tension between your position and my position.
Yeah.
Which we've already touched upon. We've not really discussed it much. We've just sort of highlighted it because, again, you're kind of framing it as America and Americans, whereas I think it needs to be, the church.
The church, yeah.
And I think that, that is the church in linguistically ever increasing circles. So it's firstly the Anglosphere church, because we can talk to one another, and then going outwards to other churches as we can help them. I think in terms of sort of cultural messages that I think the church should be pushing out into society is, one, we've got to point out that there was and can be again a Christian civilization, and that Christian civilization is superior to an Islamic civilization.
That is true.
There's got to be international Christian solidarity amongst Christians. The reason why we're seeing churches starting to burn down in New York in America is because, sadly, the American church ignored burning churches in Egypt and Pakistan for decades.
And Nigeria.
Yes. Another thing that we need to put out there is that, Jesus is a greater example to the world, a greater teacher, a greater spiritual leader than Muhammad.
Yeah.
That both communism and Islam have both failed, and we can document and demonstrate their historical failure. And that we should be emphasizing our identity with the church. And the reason why I say that is bringing us back to this point of tension between your position and my position, is that for you, you're framing this as kind of like an American struggle against Islam. And I'm trying to frame this as a church struggle against Islam, and whilst both of those narratives can be true at the same time, depending on which one you lean into, it's going to frame your reference, it's going to frame your organizational principles, it's going to frame your ideological goals that you're trying to achieve and who you're trying to achieve them for and what you try to achieve. Whereas I would see, any kind of American aspect to this struggle as just being a more local version of the wider church's struggle, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You know, and I think those are some of the cultural messages that we need to get. Do you want to come back on any of those, or what's your thoughts?
Well, of course, the differences between our countries in terms of structure and in terms of even the place of the church with respect to the government is somewhat different, just as a matter of reality. And so I don't disagree with you that Christians, as I hope is evident, that Christians should be exerting their full and applying their full understanding of what is good and right from the Bible. Obviously, fulfilling the Great Commission is the highest priority for Christians over any other government involvement or whatever. Oftentimes, one of the reasons that we have the problems in our government, in my view, over the past decades, Christians have stepped so far away from being involved in government just because they thought that the Great Commission was everything to the exclusion of that. And I think it's not an either or. I think it's a both and kind of thing. But as a matter of let's say the church, the ecclesiastical structure being involved in governing the country, we don't have, for example, a Church of England or a Church of America or anything like that, and there won't be, because that's not under the current structure, because our Constitution separates. It says that there shall be no establishment of religion, and by that, by the way, they did not mean that you cannot apply the Bible, have a general understanding. This is one of the things that Dr. Ibrahim talks about in his book. It doesn't mean that you can't understand the United States to be a Christian nation. In fact, the nation was founded with a requirement in many of the states to hold elected office. You had to affirm the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And the basic principles of the gospel, you had to affirm that. You could not hold elected office until you did. And that was not against the U.S. Constitution. What they denied was the establishment of a given church, a given denomination, if you will, or church ecclesiastical structure. So I don't know.
Or have you disappeared?
Kind of what's the word? Peel this orange or all across the world. Somebody I've never met and probably never will meet, way over in Nepal or Nigeria or many of these places. They are my brother and sister in Christ, and my bond with them is closer than any other bond in the world. And we definitely need to think that way, and to care what happens to the church, and to take what actions we can within the boundaries of the governing authorities to do that. And if there's unjust governing authorities, we need to work to with justice to change that situation. But that's getting into sort of tricky territory in Romans 13 and so forth. But I think there is space for that as well. So how does that come around? I don't know. You've heard me say that the past couple of minutes. Does that comport with your view of things, or are you going a little bit a step further?
Well, I think I'll be honest. You cut out part of it, and so I didn't catch the full point, which is hugely frustrating. So I can't answer your question, which is desperately annoying. But I do think there is a much deeper conversation that the church needs to get sorted on, in terms of what is the theology that it should frame and prism itself in terms of civilizational projects. But I do want to start moving the conversation forward. And so in terms of, we talked about cultural messages that we both feel that the church needs to be putting out there. In terms of like political goals, what would you say are the three political goals, your top three political goals, that you think the church should be pursuing in the world of politics within sort of Western society? Now I can go first if you need time. So
yeah, go ahead. I have things
yeah,
in mind, but go ahead.
maybe my answers will stimulate your answers. Firstly,
Yeah.
I think we need to tear up the international framework, because I believe that international framework is the very thing that is hindering us. So,
What
for
do you mean by
instance,
international framework?
International treaties and international institutions like the EU and the UN.
I agree. I agree with that completely. Yeah.
Yeah, the reason why I would say that is that, for instance, in the UK, we've got mass uncontrolled immigration. But because of a bunch of international treaties, we can never test in court whether it is true or not that such immigrants have acted illegally by entering the country, because it is illegal to enter the country without a passport.
Yeah.
But the moment you say that you're a refugee, you can't be tried for entering the country illegally. And so we've got this catch-22 of, we can see with our own eyes that tens of thousands of people are breaking the law and entering the country illegally, but it can never be tested in court because international treaties prevent us from putting these people on trial and until they've committed some other crime. So that would be one of the key things that I think we need to do. The second thing that I think that we need to do is that we need to filter our immigration to a system that helps and aids in supporting the people that are born in the country, because this is the Odorama Somori. But it's also an immigration policy that has a cultural filter and says that we will have a preferential treatment to those that add to, contribute to, support and sustain, enrich the Judeo-Christian civilization that we're trying to create. Along with other quality filters, like, whether you've got the kind of economic skills that we want and whether there's jobs available and, whether you're coming here to work and stuff like that. But one of the filters that we need to have is a cultural filter that assesses whether you're going to be an aid or a hindrance to a Judeo-Christian civilization. I think a third kind of goal is that, certainly in the UK, we've got to take seriously the penetration of the Islamists into the state infrastructure, because we've got Islamists now in our parliament. We have Islamists operating in our prison systems legally, like within the state. We've got them operating within the Home Office. We've got them operating within the police. And like, I forget who was the American politician that was like, oh, the communists, they're infiltrating everything. And is it Carter?
Joseph McCarthy.
Joseph McCarthy. Sorry, like
McCarthy.
Yeah. We need essentially, something that recognizes that is the threat that we're facing and seeks to proactively go through the state, removing Islamists from operating within the state, and recognizing that the Islamist Brotherhood is seeking to penetrate state infrastructure and use it to its own ends. So those would be three of my most immediate political goals that the church should be pursuing. What would be three of yours?
Well, I think that what I'd like to do is I'd like to affirm those three and offer further comment. So I've been saying this for many years. Of course, the enforcement of immigration law in the United States is something that has been, until recently, was not controversial. It was affirmed by everybody, but then we could never get it enforced. Broadly popular, making sure that only people who are, there is a distinction between legal entry and illegal entry. And what you're really talking about when you say, oh, people who entered illegally should be allowed to stay, is you're basically saying my preference is now ruling the country rather than the will of the people. In this case, the will of the people is represented in our laws. And what they're also saying is, if you think about it, this idea that everybody should, regardless, there's a certain category of people who shouldn't be subject to the laws of the country. It's a very anti-equality stance. So the Democrats, actually, interestingly, in our country, have always been the anti-equality party. The left has been the anti-equality, I would say, ideology. They want to assert, well, yeah, you can enforce the law against these people, but not against those people, and so forth. So yes, we do need to deport everybody who's not here legally, everybody, including the children who are born to people and so forth. And it's not because you dislike people. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's because you do care about people, and you do care about the people's will and the protection of society, and the fabric of society relies upon the law being upheld equally for everybody. And so, in fact, this is the single issue. It's interesting, Bob, I don't know if you knew this, but when there were 17 candidates originally in 2016, when Trump was first elected, and of the candidates, the only two that made it to the final cut were Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. And as it happens, they were the only two candidates who are taking this view of the immigration thing, that we are going to enforce immigration law and deport all people who are, that was their front and center issue. And I am convinced that that is the reason that Donald Trump was elected, because people have a sense of, we wanted equality. And we have resented for decades the fact that that the government was not enforcing the people's laws, basically saying, well, you can pretend like you're governing this country, but really you're not. So that's number one. And so your second point was on, so that was on
international treaties. International treaties, migration, and Islamist penetration to the state.
So on the international treaties point, the United Nations, of course, we knew this when the League, and I wrote an article which went into an encyclopedia, and it, unfortunately, the editors mangled it, and I was really angry because it went into print, not saying exactly what I had written. But the United Nations, first of all, their Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a terrible document. It does not recognize, it throws things in there that are not human rights and so forth. But as far as the legitimacy, yeah, what you're talking about is the sovereignty of different national governments. People say, "Oh, you're a nationalist," but really, the opposite of nationalist is an imperialist. And so, the United Nations is an imperialist endeavor, as is the EU, and furthermore, it is one that is not accountable to the people who are governed. And those are the two major flaws with it. So yes, the treaties need to be abolished. Why? Because people need to have a say. This is one of our major complaints of the founders against King George, is the people were not having a say in the laws which they were being asked to live subject to. And everybody has, it's kind of a basic thing. Everybody has or at least we affirm it, and I think it has roots biblically, but we have an obligation to government, but we also have a responsibility. And when that, a global tyranny takes over, which is what the UN is moving toward and what the EU is moving toward, yes, borders are something that are established by God. Yeah, I mean, we saw it in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve were cast out. It's not something, and the nations, the Bible says again and again that the leaders are elevated and deposed, by God's will, and that we're to be subject to the governing authorities. So these nation states are part of the plan for the world, and we do need to get back to that. So that's the second point. I agree with your point on that we need to do away with the United Nations and with the EU. I don't think we need to tear up every treaty between every nation necessarily, but they should be evaluated, and a treaty. Okay, so to give you an example, in the United States, we have the treaty with
Dr. Brubaker, you've disappeared again. So if you can hear me, your example on the treaties.
And President Obama wanted against that treaty. But for a treaty to be valid in the United States, it has to be passed through the Senate. It has to be approved by the Senate. and it's by 2/3 of the Senate. And so, so it's valid once that happens, but that was not going to pass the Senate because it was a bad treaty. It was going to give Iran nuclear weapons. So what did President Obama do? He went and passed it by an executive order. He basically bound the country to a treaty, but without going through the process of a treaty, which means that we aren't really bound to it as a treaty. We're just bound to it so long as he's president. And of course, Trump came in and repealed it, wrote a different order. So that's kind of the thing there. So I think nations, just as they have the right to govern, they have the right to exist, they also have the right to enter into treaties with other nations. But those treaties need to be examined, and they need to be, in my view, they need to be just and approved by the people who are being governed by them.
I would just before you move on to the third point, I would just sort of press that our assessment of these treaties must first ask the question, is this treaty likely to aid the church here in the land, or is it likely to harm the church here in the land? And that should be one of our thoughts
Absolutely.
Yeah. So go on, the third point.
Well, let me make one little comment on that. So on the topic of abortion, for example, we are funding things that Christians should not be involved in funding with our tax dollars, and that technically, according to the Constitution, are not allowed to be funded because the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution limits the sort of things that can be funded with taxpayer dollars. But yeah, so Christians should be saying, look, if we're funding abortions or sex change operations in Africa or even in our own country with tax dollars or by some sort of treaty, we need to not be involved with that treaty. Why? Because the Bible says this is wrong. So, yeah.
Okay, so to the third point on, do you want to come back on that one, or shall we move on?
Remind me of the third point again.
The third point is certainly in the UK, there is light to third point was light to moderate penetration by Islamists into the state.
Into the state, yeah. So the other issue even with legal immigration, I want to take a step back, because the reason this is happening in our country at least, is because we've had a very open immigration policy. It used to be the case that if you were an enemy of the United States, for example, if you had been a member of the Communist Party or any other ideology that was dedicated to the ultimate overthrow of the US government, you could not enter. And as you and I both know, many, not all Muslims would do this, but there are many aspects of what we would say mainstream Islam that are dedicated to the overthrow ultimately of the US government and probably to the UK government and the establishment of Islamic governance. And so people who, I wouldn't say that should necessarily be, Christians could be thinking this way, but I think just as a societal concern, look, if you do not understand the governing system that we've set up, and if you're not committed to upholding it rather than overthrowing it, you need to not be here. Now, once people are here, once people have become citizens, it's really hard to say, well, if your constituency want to elect you, I don't know I'd be amenable to look at ways of thinking about those kind of things, but I really don't know in our current structure. But I just want to point out that the problem that you described of people who do not believe, for example, that everybody should be equal before the law, or that people should be free to speak and act according to their conscience. When people who have those commitments sit in a position of legislative or governing authority in our countries, that's a problem. And somehow we do need to think about that and address that problem.
Yeah, and I would extend the political test to not just those that are against the nation, but those that are against the Christian faith. So for me, anyone who's overtly committed to an ideology that is anti-Christian, I don't think needs to be anywhere near a lever of power But time is against us, and
Okay.
I want to press forward a bit and talk about the sort of social responses of the church. So we were pleased to know we've done 3 out of the 5, and we've only got 2 more to get through if we can just soldier through the Wi-Fi difficulties. So in terms of social responses, I think that one of the chief social responses that Christians need to do, and certainly in places where there's demographic collapse, like there is in the UK, France, Germany, Italy, Sweden, and so on, is Christians need to form themselves into what I call Benedict communities. And that is this idea that Christians deliberately consolidate geographically so that they become a supermajority within a given area. And the reason that I would argue for this is that what it does is it gives an amplified influence across the full spectrum of civilization. It allows you to dominate economically, dominate politically, get your representatives elected, set the educational agenda, organize society's rhythms according to your own concerns, be the dominant factor in the economy. And like we're seeing with Muslims in Dearborn, Michigan, and in places in Texas, as well as in the UK. And we also see it in other communities as well, like the Amish in America, the Mormons in Utah. And in the UK, we've got, Republicans and Unionists in Northern Ireland. The idea of consolidation geographically amplifies your voice and your ability to exert yourself. It kind of has an amplification effect. And as as the West, because of liberalism, I would say, because of liberal secularism, continues to give root and space for Islamization, it's a kind of, by consolidating, we allow ourselves to regain the initiative, because the Muslim community is using the Benedict option. And the only way that you can beat a Benedict option is with another Benedict option. And that would be one of the kind of social responses that I think we need to do. I think the other thing that we need to do as Christians is we need to rediscover how to recreate families, which is something that the church has failed on catastrophically. We're not good at creating families. We're not good at supporting the ideas of new family formation. It's almost taboo in churches for us to talk about it. We don't have many social structures to permit it. And the final social move that I think the church needs to do is connected to our youth. In the UK, I can't speak for America, but in the UK, what experts call the stickiness of religion from one generation to the next is collapsing in lots of churches. But you can see in communities like the Orthodox Jewish community, the Muslim community, the Amish community, again in America, that if you, and this is going to sound politically incorrect, but it's meant to, if you alienate your children from liberal secular culture and society, they are more likely, and give them pride in their identity as Christians, they're more likely to hold on to it, and they're more likely to sustain it, especially if that is also combined with a Benedict style community. And I think these are 3 of the moves that we need to be making as Christians across the West, across the English-speaking world, in response to the Islamization that's occurring. What are your thoughts, or do you have other ideas? Do you disagree with any of my ideas? Over to you.
Yeah, I think that your third concern, that is the children, would resolve partly if the second concern, that is the weakening of the family, was resolved. There's one additional thing that is happening, and of course, the alienation from the progressive, shall we say, spirit of the age, or the darkness that surrounds us is a real issue. We find it very much in our public schools in the United States. So there's a growing movement of people away from the public schools. The public schools have basically established the religion of progressivism and have moved away from teaching, from the primary objective of teaching competence in in the basics of math and science and reading and so forth. They do teach those things, but there's a very, very strong emphasis upon indoctrination in the liberal progressive religion. And so children are becoming devotees of that religion, to the great pain of and suffering of their parents, and to the detriment of society. So moving toward homeschooling, I don't know if that's an option in the UK. It is an option in the United States, and more people are taking advantage of it. I ran for school board. You can also try to affect the system from inside. So the family, but going back to your first 2 points, the first 2 points interestingly touch upon the first 2 commands that were given to Adam and Eve when Adam was created, and that was when they were created, and that was fill the earth and subdue it. And be fruitful and multiply was the first commandment, and fill the earth and subdue it. And I think we have abdicated. It touches on issues of birth control, how early and how people think about getting married and having children and making a family a center of things, about staying married, and so forth. But that is, look, God made quite clear that he is concerned with us being fruitful in the world. And I think that, could be allegorized and understood in many other ways, but certainly it applies to, to populating the earth, and then the fill the earth and subdue it. And that's where I would push back on your first point a little bit. I have the Benedict option book. I have read it. I do think that I do understand maybe in some cases with doing that, but I think that while there may be a time for people to live in a city, a lot of the bad things in the Bible happened in very concentrated areas and cities and so forth. But, I think we need to not too quickly discard that commandment to fill the earth and subdue it and be salt and light all over the world. Now, it may not be what our adversaries are doing, and they're gaining ground, but when we abandon territories like Dearborn, Michigan, and we abandon, all the liberal progressive, where we feel like we failed, we have failed politically in many of these areas, but those are also areas that need a Christian witness, a Christian presence, even in the midst of adversity. And so while I don't want to completely dismiss thinking about those things, my sense would be that Christians everywhere need to be engaged in the church, in their local church, being and understanding what the church is and what a healthy church looks like and what it does. Be engaged in active evangelism, in active participation in local governments, and mainly local governments, but also to the extent that they're called national and state level governments and so forth. So I don't know if our minds would meet on those. Certainly on the other 2 objectives I would, and on the other one I'm open, but my inclination is, boy, I really hate to abandon. Some of the parts of our country are just, it feels like they're just so far gone and everybody is fleeing them. Christians actually have fled them, and I think that's partly why maybe they're being left to feel the damage that they brought on themselves. But I wonder if it was the right thing for Christians to totally abandon those spaces.
Well, I would say that you see, there's a couple of assumptions that you've made there that I would want to challenge you on, which is, firstly, the Benedict option is not about retreat; it's about consolidation.
Yeah,
and any army when its lines have been broken and the enemy is behind its lines, the strategic response is to retreat, consolidate, regain the initiative, and then once again advance. So for me, the Benedict option is not about surrendering. It is about remustering our strength so that we can go back on the offensive.
Yeah, that makes sense.
the Benedict option doesn't even need to be about consolidating in retreat. It can be about consolidating in a fence. So what about mass Christian migration to the troubled areas?
Yeah, that's that's an interesting thought.
What, rather than running away from them? But
Yeah,
the point is, unless we consolidate, we're too spread out, we're too thin, and we don't have the necessary concentration of manpower and resources to make a significant impact. And so the idea of maintaining, for want of a better term, the parish system or the diocesan system, is not is not going to be concentrated enough to have a major effect, especially when the horse has already bolted, like it has at Dearborn, Michigan. Like your individual church in Dearborn, Michigan is not is on a ticking clock to its extinction.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Because what ends up happening is, even if it makes a couple of converts, and maybe loses a couple of converts, it will never be able to convert enough people that in a strongly held Muslim area that you end up with sea change within that Muslim area, and it will never replace natural attrition of people moving away, or people dying, or people failing to get married and have kids on their own. And so we've got to just accept that model is not appropriate for the challenges that we face. And this is a conversation that is difficult for Christians, because there's a lot of, especially in all church leadership, there is vested interest in keeping things how they are. But those things are not working, and we need to start talking about why they're not working. Hence why I brought it up. Do you want to come back on that before we move on?
No, I think I think those are valid points. And yeah, I mean, there's also a place, I would say, in a situation like Dearborn, Michigan, for example, there is a place for the power of government to come in and reassert. The fact of the matter is that the United States Constitution, including its guarantees of free speech, and all the other laws that run contrary to the de facto law that's being imposed in some of these places now, it applies through every square inch of the United States. And it doesn't matter if the local population doesn't think that it should apply, it does apply. And so we need to figure out, that may be a totally different discussion, but we do need to figure out how to politically and legally to reassert those, the fact that that is the case. But what was your last point that we need to get onto?
So I was just going to talk about economic responses. And I think that, it's connected to the sort of social and political, is that we need to create, as it were, a Christian economy. And I'm shamelessly going to plug my own app. It's called The Christian Economy. If you haven't downloaded it, do so. And the point is, we need to keep the Christian pound, the Christian dollar, circulating inside the Christian community for as long as possible. Because the longer we keep that Christian pound, that Christian dollar circulating amongst Christians, then it strengthens Christian families, it strengthens Christian businesses, it strengthens Christian churches, it strengthens Christian charities, and they can be more ambitious. And as the Christian community as a whole becomes more enriched, it allows the church then to do more. And so we do need to be partisan about who we trade with, who we work for, because, who we buy from. The reason being is because one of the ways that the progressives have gained such political and cultural capital over our societies is because they control huge chunks of the economy. And as they own those chunks of the economy, it means that they gain influence over culture and politics. If we as Christians can organize ourselves economically to kind of wage a Christian crusade economically, to drive the progressives out ever more from more and more of the economy by creating Christian alternatives and supporting Christian alternatives, then that frees up Christians to be able to speak more Because if you complain to their boss and their boss is a Christian who agrees with them, the boss isn't going to sack them. And because the Christian knows he's not going to get sacked for upholding Christian values publicly, he can be bolder in doing so.
Yes.
And we diminish and we start to edge out the progressives from our society, as well as Islamization, which applies the same principles. I'll let you respond to that, and then I'll come up with my next thing, economic sort of response. Do you want to come back on that bit?
Yeah, I've been thinking about those things a lot in the past year, especially. And in fact, there are some, many Americans have what's called a 401k. We have investment, mutual fund investments and things like that. And the problem with the mutual fund, do you know what that is?
I'm afraid I don't know.
Okay, the mutual fund is there's an investment firm that you send them money. You say, I want this category of investment, so much in large capital and different types of investments in the stock market. And then they go ahead and they buy lots and lots of different funds, and they have many different clients, and so they have a lot of money to work with, and they invest in things that will give the maximum growth of the and profit for their customers. And most people invest these ways, and they don't actually do much of the work of applying a critical eye to what they're investing in. And the problem, as you know, is that our progressive spirit of the age is governing and leading, and activists are leading many of these companies, large companies, in a terrible direction. And what you're talking about in terms of denying business to companies that are doing bad things, which is basically, I think, what you're talking. But you're also talking about supporting, you say, the Christian dollar and the Christian pound, which I understand to mean, supporting Christian businesses. Supporting Christian businesses, yeah. So I would say yes. So I sold, for example, I'll give you an example. I had some NVIDIA stock, which I bought at it made a tremendous profit for us because I happened to buy it when it was not worth much, and then it became very successful. But I became aware several months ago that they were supporting, I forget exactly the details of it, but so I'm telling you my impression. My impression was, and what I heard was that they were advocating for this transgender thing toward, especially as it pertains to children. And I said, sorry, I can't have my money supporting an organ. And it's likely people, by all accounts, that stock was likely to grow. But I went and I sold every last share that I had in that stock, and I reapportioned it to something else. So I think that's a kind of thing people need to be paying attention and saying, no, I'm not going to support bad things. Now, with respect to supporting, so we have, we interact economically with all kinds of different people throughout the, in life. And so we have people coming, doing work on our house or things like that. Yeah, I think it's very good to support Christian businesses. But the other thing is I'm also a Gideon. So we have people coming to our door all the time doing, windows or yard work or all different kind of things. And I'll just interact with them and give them a Gideon New Testament and say a word of witness and whatever. So I think there's a place for those economic interactions. And when it comes to business, when you are patronizing someone's business, you have a right to speak into their life in a way that somebody who is not a customer doesn't necessarily have. So those individual one-on-one interactions, I think I could still see space for doing that. But I think in the larger point, yes, giving oxygen to those businesses that are taking a good stand. There's a coffee company that is dedicated to opposing the abortion industry in the United States. It's called 7 Weeks Coffee. It's in our around here. So people who are combining and sort of hitching a Christian and it's an overtly Christian company, you know, who are doing those kind of good things in society, I think really we do need to get behind them and say, yeah, we're going to buy from you and not from somebody who's not doing that.
Yeah, I think I just want to, because this is something else that I often think distorts Christians' thinking. Not necessarily in your case, Dr. Brubaker, but in conversations with brothers and sisters who perhaps maybe aren't as erudite or as learned, but is that this overemphasis on evangelism and funneling everything through this concept of evangelism, to the point that it distorts all our thinking on every other question. You know, because I would say, for instance, if a Christian company, doesn't exist, then obviously you've got to use, if you can't find a Christian trader or company to work with, well, you've still got to do your business. So you trade with the least harmful alternative. And, you know, if it is a case that, you're building a bridge and there is a Christian company out there, but the last 7 bridges that they've built, 2 of them have collapsed. And there's a secular one out there that's built 20 bridges and none of them have collapsed. Then you would have good economic reason, good noble reasons to trade with the non-Christian company, even over the Christian company. But I think that we do need to be much more strategic about how we use our pounds. And there is a genuine opportunity. I think, for instance, many international churches like the Salvation Army, the Roman Catholic Church, the Methodist Church, they've all got their own banks. It's not well known, this, but they've got their own international banks. Why don't these church banks go into competition with the high street banks as a way of reordering our economy? We can do economic things that would really impact. Well, I want to give my second point, and please do feel free to put in your own ideas if anything comes to mind. My second point is that, and it's related to the first, is that if you're a Christian who's transitioning from one job to another, do your best to go and find a Christian organization to work for. Because one of the principal reasons why so many Christian organizations start off with good Christian aims and agendas is that because they can't find enough Christians to come and work for them, they start taking on more and more non-Christians. And then eventually those non-Christians start to dilute the Christian ethos and message of whatever the institution, organization, or business is. And so if you have the opportunity to work for a Christian company, even if it means earning a little less, so long as it allows you to live properly, I'd encourage you to go and work for a Christian organization over a liberal secular one. Because a lot of our best people take their skills into progressive businesses rather than helping to advance Christian institutions, organizations, and businesses. So that would be my second point. Do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I don't think it's I would say it's probably a case by case. I don't object to what you're saying. We have had experiences, my wife and I both, in employment situations, both with overtly Christian businesses that are, of course, not ministry businesses, but just businesses, and with secular ones. And interestingly, it's a limited, it's anecdotal. Obviously our data set is not huge because you only have so many jobs in your life, but just because a business is run by people who are Christians or with a Christian mission statement or so forth does not necessarily, I don't know quite how to frame it. Yes. So I will, in a general sense, affirm aspirationally, for Christians to be doing business with each other, working together, doing, founding companies, working for companies that are run by Christians. I mean, who wouldn't want to work for a boss who was, a Christian man or woman who's, operating on those principles? That should be a very good situation for people. But I think that well, to use a phrase not with the spiritual connotations that it should entail, but the devil is in the details on those situations. And so really, I think
what kind of
about,
details have you got in mind there? Like,
well, I mean, if you have a company,
give us a working example.
If you have a company that is it's an overtly Christian company, but that is not really operating as according to, maybe as on the surface operating with a Christian face, but is not really operating by Christian principles or being biblical in their dealing with their employees. You know, there are unhealthy, even as there are unhealthy churches sometimes too. There can be unhealthy companies.
Yeah.
And so forth.
Oh yeah, so, and I think that's part of that's part of the problem is that, you know, and I can think of some in the UK, but for legal reasons, I'm not going to say the names. But I know of Christian organisations in the UK that are Christian, but because they can't recruit the talent, they are just badly run.
Yeah.
But that's the problem that I'm trying to address is that, you know, intelligent, well-experienced
get more good people. Yeah,
we've got a brain drain within the church.
That's right.
In the intelligentsia of the church and the real go-getters of the church end up giving their best energies to non-Christian corporations, companies, schools, colleges, charities, and all the rest of it. And the Christian ones just hoover up the remainder.
Yeah,
you know, and we need to change that as part of our economic response. Have you got any sort of economic responses that you want to throw into this conversation? I've got one more, but if you haven't, but feel free to. Have you got any that you want to bring up?
I confess that I haven't gone too far into the topic because I can't go too far into every single topic that I'm interested in. But the Sharia finance thing is something that I think people need to keep their eyes on.
Do you want to expand on that? Because people might not know what you're talking about.
Well, I don't know how far I can expand on it, but there are separate Islamic banking systems. For, you know, it's kind of, I would characterize it as, you know, there's a prohibition against certain aspects of taking interest, for example, and things like that, which is kind of like what probably the rabbinic, you know, rules of commerce and so forth. But anyway, yeah, I don't know enough about it to know the contours of what the real issues are with our countries. But no,
well, Tim Dieppe in his book "The Challenge of Islam" actually dedicates an entire chapter to that.
Okay.
And I'll just I know him, so I know he won't mind me just reading. If you may, I'll just read the introduction.
Yeah, please.
In 2014, Britain made history by becoming the first non-Muslim country to issue an Islamic bond. The bond was issued as part of the government's commitment for the UK to become the Western hub of Islamic finance. The British government has been encouraging the growth of Islamic finance for over 10 years and has succeeded in this aim. There are now over 20 banks offering Islamic financial services in the UK, double the number in the US. The global market for Islamic financial services was estimated to be 2 trillion in 2014 and expected to grow to 3 trillion by 2018. The City UK estimated that there are over 100,000 Islamic finance retail customers in the UK. The UK is by far the largest provider of Islamic finance courses at both undergraduate and postgraduate level, with offerings in around 70 educational institutions. With so many people seeing this as an attractive growth market, are there any reasons for caution? We think there are many, and this briefing seeks to expose some of the pitfalls and problems with Islamic finance. And if you want to know what Tim says about it, you'll have to get the book. But what I would point out is that by being a visible consumer, you begin to change and reordering society. Yeah. But by being a visible consumer, you've got to actually want to purchase things Christian for Christian reasons. And this is something that, like with so many other things, the church has neglected in its discipleship. Now, obviously, most of the things that you purchase are completely neutral. But this is a good segue to bring in my third point, which is that Christians need to boycott halal meat. This is my third economic response. Now, I want to be clear. Boycotting halal meat is not because I think that by eating halal meat, you open yourself up to demons or anything like that.
Yeah.
Because obviously Paul said food has no power in and of itself. The demons have no power except by the lies that we believe in. And so that is not my reason for saying boycott halal. The reason why I'm saying boycott halal is because if you purchase halal meat, and it's specifically halal meat, not anything that's halal.
Yeah.
Like bread is halal, but you're not going to be funding Islam by buying bread. I mean, Muslims can just eat bread. Same with fish. And if you want to take your Muslim friends out for food and not buy halal meat, then go to a fish restaurant. But the thing about buying halal meat is that it is intrinsically connected to zakat, which is the redistributive tax, which is one of the pillars of Islam. And zakat is intrinsically linked to dawah, and dawah is the Islamic mission or the Islamization process. So every time you buy halal meat, you will be indirectly funding zakat, which will directly fund Islamic dawah mission. And so by boycotting halal meat, and by making it clear that you don't want to eat halal meat, you become a visible consumer. And then there are companies, the more people that say they don't want to eat halal meat, there will then be more companies that will want to service that. I was at ARC, Jordan Peterson's conference recently.
Oh, you went to it. How was it?
Oh, it was great. And I thoroughly encourage you to go if you can next year. It'd be right up your street. And frankly, people need to meet you, Dr. Brubaker, in ARC, because I think you could teach them a lot. But the thing that they did in the conference is they served everybody unlabeled halal meat, even though they were also serving a fish dish and a vegan dish, both of which were halal for Muslims. So they had 3 halal dishes. And I was saying to them, and I've put in a complaint. I want to encourage everyone who hasn't already complained to do so, that we need to be visible in saying we don't want to be served halal meat. And hopefully next ARC conference, Muslims will still be able to eat the fish dish. They'll still be able to eat the vegan dish, but nobody will be served halal meat. And we will actually reduce the funding of zakat and dawah through doing that. So, that's my third economic response. Your thoughts on that, and then any ideas that you might have?
That's a really good point, and thank you for connecting the dots on what the purchase of halal meat entails and what it does. One of the things that we see happening in our areas is there is a move to press for halal food options for school lunches in the public schools. And it's hard to resist in the overarching environment of progressivism and multiculturalism, but my contention has been, and I think it's completely sound, is that the requirement of a school, the obligation of a school, is to provide a nutritious meal. If parents have concerns for dietary, let's say, any allergies or religious restrictions, they want food that's been blessed by some religious official or slaughtered in a ritual way, then they need to pack a lunch for their child and send it to school on their own. It should never, ever, ever be funded by the taxpayers, because it exceeds the obligation of the schools. And so I don't know what shape that. I would imagine that that's an issue in the UK. That's once again, you use the term "the horse has already left the barn." This probably is the case in the UK with that. But we're trying to help people to understand that here, because, as you say, then in that situation, given what you've described, then you have taxpayer dollars now going to the funding of dawah to advance Islam in your society, and that's a real big problem.
Yeah, and I would say that the thing to counter, because obviously there will be a playing of the victim card, but the easy counter is that, because a long time ago I dated a couple of Muslim girls, but at that point I still wasn't willing to eat meat, and but my get around was that I took them to fish restaurants, because fish is automatically halal, but it doesn't have the same economic ties to zakat, not necessarily. And so you can purchase a fish from any fishmonger, and that fishmonger could be a Christian or a Jew, and a Muslim can eat it. And so you can then give good, healthy food to Muslims whilst not forcing halal meat on anybody. And there's a school here in the UK called the Michaela School, where they serve vegetarian dishes for all students, because that way it avoids conflict, and then the parents can feed them meat at home. And I think that's also a good option, because it doesn't hurt any child to have a bit more veg in their life, and then their parents can feed them the meat that they want to feed them at home. And I think that that's also a good way around that particular problem. But we've got to learn to articulate the sort of we've got to understand the nuances of the debate, and I think a lot of people on our side don't understand the nuances of the debate. Any thoughts on that before we come to final thoughts?
No, I agree completely, and with the complete elimination of meat, again, I would just say, look, the schools, if it makes economic sense, fine. But if people have an objection to a certain, for religious or philosophical, or I'm a vegetarian or whatever, those are things that, I guess, if all of society goes that direction, but really the purpose of a school should be just a nutritious meal. Parents have particular concerns or specifications, they should just take care of it on their own. As a general principle, and you don't even need to bring, religion into it, or you're saying you're against Islamic, whatever. You just say, look, this is not something that we are going to even consider when we're deciding what food to put in school lunches. We're only looking at the nutritious value, because that's our purview.
Yeah, I think that the danger with that kind of logic is that could so easily be flipped by the Muslim to say, yeah, we're going to serve halal as standard, and if you want something else, then you bring a packed lunch. Like in Dearborn, Michigan, for instance. Whereas if you go at it from the point of view of, we are a Christian country, we do not believe in ritual slaughter of animals, and so therefore we will not serve ritually slaughtered animals in our schools, but we will provide either a fish dish, a vegetarian dish, or non-halal, non-kosher meat. And if you don't want that, it's on you to bring. Then you've got a greater. It's much clearer, and it doesn't allow the Muslims the wiggle room to flip the logic on you.
Yeah, that's a good point. That I agree with. I accept that point. Now, so in our country, that sort of stipulation would need to be made either in probably a state constitution or in the federal constitution. Namely the prohibition of I don't even know how you phrase it, because like the anti-Sharia legislations, they fail because there's a way to craft them so that they accomplish the desired purpose, but without going over an edge that butts up against certain established human rights and so forth. But anyway, the crafting of things is something that needs to be considered and done with wisdom and so forth. But I agree with what you said there.
Yeah. I think you can get rid of the minefield and the razor edge by just giving up on liberal secularism and going, we are going to be a Christian state. And then you don't have that razor edge to walk on. You can just stamp all over Islamization quite freely. Okay, so any sort of final thoughts in terms of, or anything that you don't feel that we've touched on that you want to get out there as really important, in the church's response to political Islam and Islamization?
Yeah, I think I would just encourage people listening, watching, listening later, who are Christians to take seriously the we focus a lot of our attention on atheism or other the other things in the world, but Islam is a very, very large, with almost 2 billion people. It's a very important concern. It's a very real threat to the world, not only to our political situations, which is partly what we've been talking about, but to the souls of men and women and children who need to know what's true from what's false. And so I would just encourage people to read, dedicate a certain part of your life to understanding these things, and listening to conversations like this, participating, and then praying about what your God would have you do on these really important questions, just in a general sense. And then, Bob, if I could just also mention again, A.S. Ibrahim's book, The Sharia versus the U.S. Constitution. It is now published. I think it's available through Amazon in the UK. And yeah, for those who are interested, I just put up I'm still developing it, but there's a website called electionmaps.org, which is kind of a fun thing to play around with. It's only the United States, but there may be some Americans watching this, or people in the UK who are interested, but it's a navigable election map of the United States all the way back to our founding in I think the first election in 1788, something like that. So you can see who was in office in each different place as the United States grew westward and so forth. So electionmaps.org. And that's it.
Brilliant. I mean, my final thought would simply be this to the church, is that I genuinely believe that the church is not called to preserve Western civilization, but it is called to pursue the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
And the kingdom of God is and leads to directly the civilizational project. And we need to rediscover that connection between the kingdom of God and building civilization, and seek to build a civilization that is firmly, completely Christian. And that in itself, I believe, is sufficient to result in the elimination of Islamization wherever it takes root. And this ultimately is what I think the sort of kind of answer is, and pursue that in a muscular fashion.
Yep.
I just want to say, Dr. Brubaker, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on, and hearing you talk on these matters. Shame about the technical difficulties that we had at the start. I know that some one or two points probably didn't land as strong as they could because we lost you a little, but nonetheless, I think you've elucidated some of the problems and brought our attention to certain facets of this picture that as Christians we need to be discussing in much more detail. In closing, sorry, we wanted to say something?
No, I just thank you. I agree.
Please do feel free to share this yourself, and upload this onto your own channels if you want to, Doctor. In closing, I just want to say, if you haven't already, please like this video. That includes those of you that are listening to it as a recording later. Subscribe if you haven't, and share the videos, because we've got to get a conversation going in the church. Share it amongst your Christian friends, because we've got to get a conversation going in the church about these complicated issues so that we can inform ourselves and act accordingly. And if you haven't already, if you like what I'm doing, if you find that it is beneficial to the church, then please do consider becoming a covenant partner after prayer. And if you do, all the links are in the description box. I'm going to close with a psalm, and then we'll close. And Dr. Brubaker, if you hold back a minute in the back studio, we'll just have a quick debrief.
Got it.
So I'm going to read from Psalm 97. Yahweh is king. Let the earth rejoice. The many isles be glad. Cloud, black cloud enfolds him, saving justice and judgment, the foundations of his throne. Fire goes before him, sets ablaze his enemies all around. His lightning flashes light up the world. The earth sees it and quakes. The mountains melt like wax before the Lord of all the earth. The heavens proclaim his saving justice. All nations see his glory. Shame on all who serve images, who pride themselves on their idols, who bow down to him. Bow down to him, all you gods. Zion hears and is glad. The daughters of Judah exult because of your judgments, Yahweh. For you are Yahweh, most high over all the earth, for transcending all gods. Yahweh loves those who hate evil. He keeps safe his faithful, rescues them from the clutches of the wicked. Light dawns for the upright, and joy for honest hearts. Rejoice in Yahweh, you who are upright. Praise his unforgettable holiness. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.